All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a deeply painful but honestly incredibly fascinating paradox. We're looking at why having a highly accurate perception of people and situations so often results in outright punishment rather than, gratitude. It's this wild dynamic that leaves some of the absolute most observant people out there feeling completely alienated. Okay, let's set the scene. Imagine you walk into a room and instantly you just perceive things. Not in some supernatural way, but you vividly detect the suppressed grief in a colleague who looks perfectly put together. Or maybe you sense the simmering resentment right beneath a super warm handshake at a family gathering. It feels like a superpower, right? But man, it often feels more like a curse. Because as we're going to explore today, sharing these accurate insights almost always pushes people away. You offer them clarity, and in return, you literally get pushed out into the cold. To really get why this happens, we have to look at the legendary psychologist Carl Jung. He actually spent decades studying people with this exact capability. He called it differentiated perception. Basically, it's this extraordinary form of unconscious pattern recognition. People with this ability process microexpressions, shifts in tone, and body language so insanely fast that they just know the truth of a dynamic long before anyone has even opened their mouth. But here's the kicker. The hardest part isn't the perception itself. It's the massive backlash. When you gently point out the reality of a situation, society pushes back, and they push back hard. You point out a glaring inefficiency at work or a toxic family dynamic, and you aren't thanked? No way. Instead, you're called negative. You get accused of projecting your own issues, or you're blamed for creating problems out of thin air. Ultimately, you're just left feeling incredibly isolated, kind of watching the world from the sidelines, wondering why on earth no one else can see that the sky is blue. So let me ask you to be brutally honest for a second. How many exhaustive, draining conversations have you had where you're desperately trying to make someone understand what you so clearly see, only to walk away feeling completely invisible? You lay out all the facts, right? You outline the reality of a bad business decision or a failing relationship, and you just hit a brick wall. It's an exhausting, heartbreaking cycle, but there's a deeply ingrained psychological reason for it. To figure out why your clarity gets so much resistance, we've got to look at the unspoken contracts of human group dynamics. Which brings us to Section 1, Society's Managed Blindness. Let's look at how human groups actually function. So Jung observed that healthy groups, whether that's your family, a corporate office, or a community group, they all survive through what he called managed blindness. This is basically a collective, totally unspoken agreement to actively ignore uncomfortable truths just to keep the peace. Think about a tense holiday dinner. Your uncle makes a super passive-aggressive comment. Everyone feels the tension, right? But everyone just agrees to pass the potatoes and change the subject. That is managed blindness in action. The group is literally prioritizing its own survival and comfort over the truth. Jung called the state of being completely bought into this dynamic participation mystique. Essentially, individuals merge their own minds with the group's avoidance. They aren't just casually ignoring the truth. They are psychologically fused with the denial itself. Everyone implicitly agrees not to notice the giant elephant in the room. And this is exactly why a highly perceptive person who refuses to ignore that elephant completely short-circuits the group's operating system. You're threatening the very fabric of their shared, comfortable delusion. So the crucial takeaway here is this. Authenticity in a system built entirely on avoidance is always going to be experienced as a direct attack. When you speak the truth in an environment deeply committed to pretending, your authenticity acts like a glaring, inescapable psychological mirror. You are holding up a reflection they desperately want to avoid. Because honestly, the group does not want to see its own suppressed anger or its flaws or its complacency. And think about it. When people see something in a mirror that they absolutely despise, they don't patiently examine themselves. They smash the mirror. This triggers the scapegoat phenomenon. You ultimately become the dumping ground for all the shadow material, the toxic dynamics and insecurities that the collective just flat out refuses to consciously face. They project their mess onto you, making you the problem. And this constant, totally unfair rejection inevitably pushes highly perceptive people into a really devastating corner. That brings us to Section 2, the trap of validation, and how you end up outsourcing your reality. Because you're constantly rejected and scapegoated, you develop this exhausting, frantic compulsion to explain your inner world just so others will validate it. You think, if I can just explain it clearly enough, they're finally going to see it. But Jung warned that operating this way means you are lacking internal authority. You are literally outsourcing your sense of reality to people who are fundamentally terrified of their own unconscious depths.
When you beg a blind system to validate your vision, you're handing over all your power. And if you wait for them to validate you, well, you're going to be waiting forever.
Think about the absolute irony here. Society spends billions of dollars on self-help books and corporate retreats telling us to speak our truth. Yet, Jung estimated that true introverted intuitives, the people actually operating with this high level of differentiated perception, they make up only about 1% of the population. We are constantly told to be authentic in a world statistically built by and for people who thrive on surface-level interactions. The real issue is that society absolutely loves the aesthetic of authenticity, but it is terrified of the 1% who actually see reality clearly. They vastly prefer convenient truths over accurate ones. They only want the truth when it fits neatly into a corporate mission statement or an Instagram post. Real, unfiltered perception makes people incredibly uncomfortable because it demands actual change. And look, if you don't fundamentally change your relationship with your own perception, this dynamic is absolutely going to destroy you. Which leads us right into Section 3, Selective Truth-Telling and Shifting Your Psychological Approach. To actually survive and thrive with this gift, you've got to make a conscious shift. You have to move away from being an unconscious absorber, someone who takes in every emotional current and feels this compulsive need to fix it with honesty. Instead of being a sponge, you need to become an individuated witness. This means you observe the chaos without absorbing it into your own nervous system, and you start wielding selective truth-telling. It's all about moving from pure reaction to calm observation. Jung actually warned, perception without discretion is not a gift, it is a disruption. Let that really sink in for a second. Indiscriminate truth-telling isn't wisdom, it's just unintegrated perception. If you walk around pointing out everyone's hidden motives just because you can see them, you aren't really helping. Without discretion, your gift just disrupts their carefully managed blindness. It's like turning on a massive floodlight in a room full of sleeping people. They are not going to thank you for the light, they're just going to be furious that you woke them up. So instead of just asking yourself if your perception is true wisdom is asking yourself a much harder question. Does the person sitting right in front of you actually have the psychological capacity to receive that truth? It's a total game changer when you realize that the answer is very often no. Most people are operating at their absolute maximum psychological capacity, just trying to get through the day. Recognizing their limits isn't insulting to them, it actually protects both of you. And answering no to that capacity question leads us to the most empowering step of all. Section 4, Sovereignty Through Silence and Building Your Psychological Containers. Building this internal architecture takes 3 really clear steps. First, observe the reality. Imagine you're standing on a platform, watching a speeding train. You see it clearly, you know exactly where it's heading, but you don't jump onto the tracks to stop it with your bare hands. You just watch it pass. Second, objectively assess their capacity to handle that reality. And third, protect your own energy by choosing selective silence. You create this strong psychological container where your perception can live safely inside you without bleeding out into environments that are just going to punish it. I want you to really look inward right now. Are you still draining your vital energy trying to explain your accurate perceptions to people who are, quite frankly, entirely committed to misunderstanding you? Think about the sheer exhaustion of trying to convince someone to see a reality they're actively avoiding. Or have you begun to embrace the untouchable, quiet power of remaining silent? Because silence isn't defeat here. In this context, silence is an incredibly high form of self-preservation. Now, Jung did warn that this profound shift comes with a cost. Relationships that relied entirely on your over-explaining or your constant efforts to fix the dynamic, well, they're naturally going to dissolve. You'll probably face accusations of being cold, closed off, or even arrogant. But the ultimate reward is absolutely profound. By stepping back, you create the space for genuine connection with the rare few who can actually meet you in truth. More importantly, you achieve untouchable self-trust, a state where your inner world feels completely valid, regardless of any external approval. It all boils down to this incredibly powerful realization. Silence is sovereignty. Stop outsourcing your reality to people who are terrified of the dark. You simply do not need their agreement to validate what you see. Learn the sacred discipline of silence. Let people have their managed blindness. Let them have their illusions. Step into the fierce, unshakable power of seeing the world exactly as it is, holding that truth within yourself, and walk forward with absolute internal authority. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to really ponder. Will you keep trying to force blind systems to see, or will you finally embrace silence and reclaim your internal authority? The choice, and the profound peace that follows, is entirely yours. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Now take a deep breath, trust what you see,
and embrace the quiet.